In this video I'm going to show you how to make this handy tie top pouch. Different ways that you can do this and different sizes you can make it in as well. So basically this is the one that we're going to make, which ties with 2 ribbons. And this is made using a 10-inch square. I will put all of your measurement details in metric and imperial in the description box underneath the video, so have a look down there for your exact measurements. And I've tied it together with 2 ribbons because one in the centre of this size would leave it gaping at the side. However, if you wanted to use poppers instead, it would be just as easy to fit those on the inside of where the ribbon is, so you can just pop that closed, which may make it a little bit more secure. Ribbons, I think you're going to find are easier. This is quite thick fabric for a popper to go through. Another alternative would be to use a hair bungee on one side and sew a button on the other side, so you just pull that over and fasten. So again, different ways of making it, you choose your own. I think the ribbons look quite pretty, particularly if you're going to give this as a gift. On the smaller version here, this is an 8-inch square. And when I open this up, you can see that I've got sewing machine feet inside there. So it's nice for chocolates, it's nice for gifts, it's nice for storing your sewing machine feet or your fabric clips or anything like that. Do be aware that certainly with the smaller one with the one tie in the middle, if you tip the whole thing upside down, they may fall out. But it's an unusual little thing, but it isn't a very easy make for you to do. And it's only using a couple of squares of fabric and some foam stabilizer on the inside as well. So go and have a look for some fabrics. Have a look at the measurements of everything you need in the description box down below. And let's get sewing. This is single-sided fusible foam. It's a Bosal product that I work in conjunction with, and on the scratchy side you have an adhesive that goes on the wrong side of your fabric, and this measures around about 1/4 of an inch in thickness, so it's easy to sew through, but it does give your box a little bit of sturdiness and shape. So this is cut to 10 inches square. I'll put the centimetres version in the description box below. And I've got 2 pieces of fabric that are cut slightly larger. These need to be at least 1 inch larger than the foam, and 4 pieces of ribbon to tie this one. As I said earlier, you can use poppers for that instead if you wish. So the first thing we need to do is to cut out the corners of this one. So if you take a pen or a marking tool, make sure it's not a heat erasable one because that'll disappear with the heat shortly. And whatever the measurement is across here, you're going to divide that into 4. So mine is 10 inches. If you're making the 8-inch version, like this one, you need to make smaller corners. So my 10 inches divided into 4 is 2.5. My 8 inches divided into 4 was 2 inches. So that's the size of the squares we cut out of the corners of the small pouch. So if you're going to make a 12-inch square, then you need to cut a 3-inch square out of the corner. So just remember to divide that by 4. So there's my 2.5-inch mark, and we'll draw that on the foamy side, not on the adhesive side, because that's going to be on the back of my fabric and I won't see the marks. And we'll do this across all 4 sides. And again, I'm using a biro. That's not a problem at all. As long as your fabric isn't too sheer and the pen mark won't show through, then something like a biro or a ballpoint pen is going to be absolutely perfect. So again, that's 2.5 inches from each side. And then I'm going to cut out the 4 corners. So the foam, if you haven't used it before, is easy to sew through, it's easy to cut through, you don't need anything special, you don't need a special needle or a jeans needle or any different scissors or anything. It's just really, really easy to work with. So just snip into those corners. My scissors are Fiskars. We have those on the Debbie Shaw Sewing website, and these are lovely. Look how sharp right up to the point they go. Really important for a pair of scissors to do that. Now I'm going to draw another line straight down the centre of these 2 marks. So that's 2.5 inches from each side. And these are all lines that I'm going to sew down shortly. And then in the boxes at the bottom, we're going to go from corner to corner, diagonally, like so. And in this one. And basically these bits are going to form this section. So that's where the 2 sides join together because of the crease we have down here. That's actually this mark here on the inside. So I'm just going to put on my iron. And Bosal likes steam, so as hot an iron as your fabric will take, and plenty of steam to really get the adhesion fusing. So let's turn that up a little bit. If you're ironing in a specific area, so if you wanted to kind of fussy cut, if you had an area of your fabric that you wanted to be specific, then you can place this over the area that you wanted to and blast some steam through from the wrong side just to hold this in place before you flip it over and iron from the right side. When I'm placing this on my fabric, I need to make sure I've got at least 1/2 inch border all the way around the edge, because that's going to make my seam allowance. So let's turn this over and just fuse it. Now I'm using a non-directional fabric, which is ideal for this type of project, because as it wraps around the pouch, if you had a directional fabric, some of it's going to be upside down. So, which isn't, you know, it's not the end of the world, but it is quite nice if your fabric is looks as though it's facing in the right direction on all 4 sides. So again, let's hold that over. This is what I'm saying about not using a heat erasable pen, because at this point you wouldn't be able to see any of the markings. Right. And then we'll open this up to the board. And I'm going to trim the seam allowance around the edge of the foam to 1/2 inch. If you're working in centimetres, make that a centimetre. It doesn't have to be exactly 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to go around the outside edges with my rotary cutter, and I'll do the inside of the cutout corners with scissors. I just find it easy with a rotary cutter. You can do the whole thing with scissors if you wish. You don't have to rush out and buy a rotary cutter ruler and mat if you don't have one, although I would recommend that you did, because they're so accurate and so easy and so useful. So I'm just doing this by eye. You can measure that and mark it if you wish, just to make sure that you get the correct seam allowance, but I think I can do that by eye pretty well. And again, that's 1/4 inch away from the edge of the foam. We're actually going to use the edge of the foam as a seam allowance. But we will cut a piece of lining fabric to the shape of the fabric. So it's important that your 1/2 inch or 1 centimetre is quite accurate. There we go. So let's take our lining fabric and place this over the top and use it as a template to cut out the same shape. Then take the foam section, and we're going to sew along all of these lines. You may like to increase your stitch length slightly to do this. So I'm going to put mine up to a 2.6 on this machine, and we'll literally sew all the lines in place. And this is kind of going to make a hinge, so it makes it easy for the box to remember where it needs to fold. That's another nice thing about the Bosal. When you sew through it like that, it bends really nicely, so you get a nice crisp seam there. And just to encourage those seams to stay nice and sharp, I'm going to press them at this point. With the smaller little tray, it's quite difficult to press once it's been sewn together. So I find by doing it at this stage really helps the finished result. Fold that in half across the bottom. And then on the sides, these are going to poke inwards like so. So it's these 2 lines here that I want to press. So that'll do the top one, that'll do the bottom one, and the same on this side. Top one and bottom one. We will press that again later, but you can see now how it's going to fold up nicely. Now we need to sew the corners together. So from the wrong side, we need to sew this corner to that corner. So let's fold the two so that they meet. And you can feel the edge of the foam where they actually meet. And we're just going to sew along this side, and you'll start to see the shape of the box forming. So a little back stitch at the end. So now you can see the sides are coming up, so let's repeat that on all four corners. So now you can see how the box is going to form its shape and how the sides are going to fold in, and that meets in the centre. So at this stage, and I could have done that earlier, I'm going to figure out where I want the ribbons to sit. And I may have cut these a little bit too long actually, but I can trim them down again later. So ignore the seam allowance, you can see where the sides are going to meet there. And I'm going to put my ribbon about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from each side. I'll just do that by eye. So just reach across and get a few clips. And I have one on here. And then the same distance from this side, and go to the top of the fabric, because we're going to stitch this in place within the seam allowance, so not through the foam, just through the fabric. And let's do the same on this side, so same distance away from the edge, and then we'll just fold this over and make sure that those two opposite sides of the ribbons are going to meet before we commit to sewing. So when that folds together, your ribbons should meet perfectly in the middle like that. So again, I'm just going to sew within the seam allowance just to hold those in place. Find it easier to do this from the inside than the outside. Whoops, that's just come away. I'll tell you what might be easier is to put a pin in here. And then I can take the clip out without the ribbon moving. That would have been a better idea. You learn as you sew. So again, just on the fabric side, not on the foam side, we'll go across the top of all four pieces. So you can see the shape that the box is going to be and how the ties tie over at the top. So we need to make up the lining. And we do this in just the same way with the corners. So we need to sew these two together, these two, and so on, with that 1/2 inch, 1 centimetre seam allowance, whatever you've chosen. So you can probably hear the rain falling on the roof at the moment. The heavens seem to have just opened while I came down here. So I'm going from a beautiful sunny morning this morning to what sounds like quite a heavy storm out there. So apologies for the noise, I can't turn the rain down. So again, do this on all four corners until you've got 2 box shapes. Again, you could make this a larger pouch. If this is the 10-inch version, you can make a 12-inch version. I'm not sure how it would be if you went up to 14 or 16 inches, but that's have a go, have a try. You never know until you experiment, do you? But I think it's a really useful little box. I've got trays and things like this with bits and bobs in on all of my sewing tables, and I've got a few because it's just handy to have everything to hand. Okay. So that's the lining section. So that's still inside out, so the seams are on the outside. This one's the right side out. I'm going to tuck the ribbons out of the way and drop the outer inside the lining. and just match up the corners there. It's quite simple, it wants to sit in quite squarely. Now if you want to pop a few pins around the top, that's fine. I'm not going to for this one, so just match all of those up. And then sew from the inside, but we're going to sew along the top of the foam here. It doesn't matter if you catch it slightly, but I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather you just ran the needle right across the top. And we'll need to leave a turning gap in one side, so I'm going to do it here. I have a couple of inches just so we can turn that the right side out. So again, let's push this under the machine. This will get really bulky. Push it out of the way. As long as you're just concentrating on your stitch line that you're actually sewing, it doesn't matter if this gets rather bulky. So keep lining up the two edges of the lining and the outer. And again, just running the needle up against the edge of the foam. I hope you can kind of get what's going on there, because I do appreciate my hands are getting in the way a little bit. This isn't quite big enough to use the free arm on your sewing machine, so sewing from the inside like that is going to be the easiest way to do it. So just keep pushing that out of the way. And sew all the way around. Almost there. Make sure your ribbons are all tucked away. We don't want to be sewing over the ends of the ribbons, so make sure those are tucked away inside the tray. Actually, the big one's a lot easier to make than the smaller one, but the smaller one was getting a little bit fiddly at this stage. So there we have it, and then we need to turn the whole thing through quite a small space. You could leave a larger one if you wanted to. The thing is with small holes, they kind of become larger when you're forcing a lot of fabric through, but it doesn't matter if your stitches crack a little bit. Just the smaller the hole that you leave, the smaller the hole that you need to sew over. So just pull all of this through. As I said, we are going to be very scrunched up at this point, so we'll iron this again. And because you've sewn up against the edge of the foam, you should have a nice neat seam across the top. So let's sew from the inside, iron from the inside, I think you'll find that easier. And just get that nice crisp finish around the edge. And we are going to top stitch this in just a second to hold it all in place. So when I come to the opening here, I'm just going to tuck the fabric inside and try and keep that nice and neat. And then when we top stitch, that's going to close the opening. And while I'm here, that's big enough to fit my iron inside and give that a nice press from the inside as well. So again, as before, from the inside, pop this under the needle and we'll sew all around the edge. I'm going to give this one final press along the crease lines. And in fact, particularly if you're making the smaller one, if it gets a little bit much or a little bit too fiddly to iron like that, a good idea would be to just hover your steam or give a blast of steam if you've got that kind of iron over where those crease lines are going to be. Then be very careful because it's hot, but squish the seam and hold it in place until it cools down. Just got a loose thread there which I don't like, so I'm just going to snip that off. And we can do the same with the base there. So just heat the whole thing up with steam and hold it until it's cool. And do the same on this side. Just to encourage those creases to stay in place. You could use a little bit of spray starch or best press if you like to hold that in place, just while you're steaming. Almost finished. We'll need to now take a hand sewing needle and thread, and I'm just going to sew into the corners to make them stay square. So right over the seam, I'm going to hide the knot inside the crease and just fold that over and put a few stitches straight across the end like this. And that's going to prevent the corners from bending inwards. They'll keep their shape better. So just knock that off. And repeat with the other 3 corners. And that's my little tray finished. So I can leave it open when I need my bits and bobs. And then to close it, I can simply tie these into bows. Nice idea for gift packaging as well, so you could fill it full of sweets and give it to somebody for Christmas or birthdays. For storage, I think it's invaluable. I know some of you are going to be using these for things like hair clips, or your sewing clips even, your notions, sewing machine needles, sewing machine feet. I did say earlier that my ribbon may be a little bit too long, which it is, so I'm just going to trim that down a little bit. And now we're finished. So those are the 2 different sizes again. This one is using an 8-inch square. I think 1 ribbon to fasten that is absolutely plenty. And this one is using a 10-inch square. You go as big as you like. So I hope you find this useful. Hope you enjoy making lots of these in lots of different sizes and lots of different fabrics. And I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.